Right now, we're seeing a lot of disinformation campaigns that have been happening in the lead up to and are currently happening at present that began on Russian language social media platforms that are spilling over into the media, into mainstream social media platforms, really disseminating messaging like there's too much terrorism, risks in Paris, France is on the verge of civil war, Paris is not clean, Paris is not particularly friendly, it's a terrible place to go as a tourist, and all sorts of disinformation opportunities that are being attributed to Kremlin-associated hackers. We're also seeing brute force attacks on websites. So what that is when there's so much traffic directed at websites that it cripples their traffic and their ability to operate. We've seen that recently on targets, including the French Film Festival and also the Grand Palais, which is going to be one of the Olympic venues for Taekwondo and I believe fencing. So they're not going to stop. They're going to do everything they can from here going forward to amplify, to disrupt, to create as much chaos as they can, because the ultimate aim here is to not give the French their moment in the international spotlight without some kind of disruption.
Jamie, we only have about a minute left, but what do we know about the U.S.'s involvement in keeping the Olympics safe and the participants safe as well?
We understand that representatives and employees from CISA, the U.S. government's cybersecurity agency, are on the ground in Paris, operating out of a joint operations center. We understand that there are also other American observers who are going to be there throughout the entire event. You've also got to remember that the next Summer Games will be in Los Angeles in 2028. So there is a real opportunity here for lessons learned for the Americans to be watching what's going on in Paris, how they anticipate and deal and encounter all of these challenges and how they can apply them in 4 years' time. So there's definitely an international effort. The French are not alone in this. Everyone is supporting them on the allied Western side, and they're certainly seeing that in the private sector as well as in the public sector.
Jamie Tarabay, Bloomberg News cybersecurity reporter, joining us from our Washington, D.C. bureau. Up next, Joe Rogan, the world's most controversial podcaster, also perhaps the most popular in the world. He's building a Texas comedy empire. That's next on Business Week.
It's 2:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ 100 index, Russell 2000, all rallying gains of 1% or more on this Friday. Stock market did get a boost at the end of a wild week after key economic data this morning bolstered speculation that the Fed will set up the stage for a rate cut in September. Every major group in the S&P 500 higher right now. S&P up 62, a gain of 1.2%. The Dow up 684 points, up 1.7%. The NASDAQ Composite Index up 1%. The NASDAQ 100 Index also up 1%. And the Russell 2000 Index of small cap shares up now by 1.3%. 10-year at 4.20% with a 2-year that's yielding 4.38%. Gold up $21 the ounce, higher by 0.9%. And a retreat for crude oil down 1.3%, $77.26 a barrel. Bitcoin today rallying 3.4%, 67,489 on Bitcoin. 3M shares up the most in more than 36 years after raising its full-year profit forecast as its new CEO vows to reinvigorate the iconic manufacturer's innovation engine. 3M up now by 21%. 3M, by the way, the maker of Post-it notes. Again, recapping, S&P up 65, up 1.2%. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Hey, thanks so much, Charlie. Do appreciate that. You guys are all familiar with Joe Rogan. He's widely believed to be the most popular podcaster on earth. He's got a huge Spotify contract. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars. On message boards, people sometimes describe him as Oprah Winfrey for men. Well, about 4 years ago during the pandemic, he decamped from Los Angeles and relocated, he and his wife and 3 daughters, to Austin, Texas. And since then, he's cultivated a lifestyle tailor-made for the new age of the comedy profession. It's ruled by podcasts instead of Hollywood movies and sitcoms. He's got a new podcast studio, he's got a sauna, a bow hunting range, and most important, a new club, the Comedy Mothership, for doing stand-up, all of it engineered to share with his friends. And over the past 2 years, a growing group of comedians and podcasters have followed Joe Rogan to set up shop in Austin. Felix Gillette and Ashley Carmen write about Joe Rogan for Bloomberg Business Week. Check out their story. It's on the Bloomberg terminal and at bloomberg.com/businessweek. Felix is Bloomberg Business Week media, entertainment, and telecom editor. He's also the author of the book, It's Not TV, The Spectacular Rise, Revolution, and Future of HBO. He joins us here in the studio. Felix, how much Joe Rogan did you listen to when writing this story?
A lot of Joe Rogan. Yeah,
Like,
months and months of Joe Rogan.
Really, months?
Yeah, because he wouldn't talk to us. He doesn't really do interviews, and he loves to talk about the comedy stuff, the comedy club on his show. So it's mixed in with, moon landing conspiracies and a lot of MMA, minutia that I don't really need to know. But it was interesting. You get his whole perspective on the comedy world.
So
too.
just not just recent podcast episodes, but episodes going back a few years?
Yeah, for years he's been talking about this. I mean, he moved from LA to Austin about 4 years ago. And yeah, he got down there and he just, like everyone who moves to Austin, they just can't shut up about it. Yeah, it's the greatest town ever. We got the best barbecue, like it's incredible.
It's pretty
like the
hot
hill
in the
country.
summer.
Yeah, it is hot in the summer. But the one thing he didn't have is he missed having a place to perform because he was a regular at the Comedy Store in LA. Austin had a stand-up comedy scene over the years, but it was always pretty minor, especially compared to the live music scene there. And so he was like, you know what? Like, I'm just going to build a comedy club for myself and my friends, and I'm going to spare no expense. He said on his show that, it's not to make money. He just doesn't want to lose money on it, but he basically just puts all the money back into the comedians, and it's a really nice club. And because Joe Rogan is Joe Rogan, and he has this huge platform that anybody who goes on Joe Rogan's show is going to get a bump for their comedy show, their podcast, their book, whatever it is. So his ability to recruit people is amazing. And every time he has someone on the show, he gives them the sales pitch. Come to Austin, come hang out with me. You can perform at the club. You can come on my show. You can have your show. You don't have to be, tethered to the studios of LA and New York anymore. Just move here. And, some people resist, but a lot of people have heard that pitch and been like, yeah, okay. And, Shane Gillis, Brian Simpson, Tony Hinchcliffe, some pretty big name comics have moved down there. And, you know, they all are headliners at the club and hang out with Rogan outside the club. There's like this whole scene around the bar at the Comedy Mothership. It's kind of fascinating when you're there because you have this feeling that anyone that's kind of in that world, Elon Musk, Johnny Manziel, anyone that's been on Rogan's podcast recently could pop in at any time. That's kind of like their clubhouse. And it's been this and then that's at the top end. And then there's been this whole trickle-down effect in Austin, where since Rogan opened the Comedy Mothership, there's now maybe a dozen other comedy clubs that have also opened up in the vicinity in downtown Austin. And now if you talk to like young, aspiring stand-up comedians, which we did for the article, you know, instead of moving to New York or LA to try and make it, a lot of them are now like, you know what, I'm going to Austin. So there's all these group houses popping up in Austin where you have, you know, 10, you know, up-and-coming stand-up comedians all packed into a house doing the open mic nights around town and desperately trying to get a spot in the Comedy Mothership.
So Joe Rogan embraced Austin, but in your reporting and Ashley's reporting, did Austin embrace Joe Rogan?
Yeah, I mean, I think they have to a certain degree. I mean, Austin has been such a boom town. You know, it's been like the fastest growing city, you know, every year for like 12 years. I think they lost the title this year. But there's been a ton of people moving there, including a lot of people from California. And, you know, there's this expression in Austin politics now, which is, you know, don't California my Texas, which initially people thought, oh, all these, you know, California immigrants are going to make our, you know, the state bluer. And actually, in the end, what's happened is it hasn't been like the liberals who've moved out of California. It's the more libertarians, tech folks that want low taxes have moved to, you know, Austin, Elon Musk, all these tech companies. So actually, Austin has gotten a little bit less liberal over time. And, you know, I was talking to Evan Smith, who's the co-founder of the Texas Tribune. He's a longtime Austin journalist. And he was saying, you know, there was a time where if Joe Rogan had moved to Austin, there would have been like an outcry. You know, but those days are basically over. Like there was a little resistance at the beginning, but then they're like, well, he's putting all this money into downtown Austin. He's revamping this part of town that really suffered during COVID. And yeah, the town has embraced him.
Can you talk a little bit about how podcasting has disrupted the traditional comedy route? Because back in the day, the whole idea of becoming a successful comedian, you know, you go and do some really good sets, you get on one of the late shows.
Right.
You do really well on the late shows, and then you're given a sitcom, and that was like gold.
Yeah.
That was the way to get to the top.
Yeah.
It's not like that at all anymore.
No, I mean, the whole profession has really shifted, and it's fascinating to think. I mean, in the 1970s, you know, the big upheaval in comedy was when Johnny Carson moved The Tonight Show from New York to LA, and you know, that was the biggest thing, like getting to do your show, you know, your act on The Tonight Show, and that could just catapult you. You get a sitcom, you get a, you know, movie, whatever. And all the producers on The Tonight Show would recruit, and they used to recruit at, you know, the comedy clubs in New York. When the show moved to LA, that all moved to the Comedy Store. And so the Comedy Store was like the place to be back in the day. And that was, you know, eventually, decades later, that's where Rogan hung out. A lot of his friends are like Comedy Store comedians. And I think they also saw that connection that existed back in the day between The Tonight Show and the Comedy Store. You know, yeah, late night television, no longer what it once was. But it is fascinating that now, like, the big thing is Rogan's podcast. And similarly, the comedy club that he runs is now kind of like a gateway. And that's where talent is, like, you know, pulled to with the hopes of like, well, maybe if I kill it, maybe if I just absolutely make a name for myself at Rogan's club, maybe then I get on his podcast, and that's seen as like, you know, the big place to be. And even people that are out there, you know, promoting whatever it is they want to promote, especially to the demographic that listens to Joe Rogan, which is like young men, you know, primarily. Like, you know, if you're selling something to that demographic, yeah, like you want to get on his podcast, you want to get on the podcasts of all of his friends who are also in Austin, this whole little universe, the Roganverse, as we like to call it. You know, and we talked to like Tucker Carlson, who's trying to launch his own streaming network. independent streaming network, yeah, he goes down there, has dinner with Joe Rogan, does the podcast, goes to the club, does another podcast in the club, and just goes hang out in the Mitzies. Like, that's the new place to be. And it is a huge shift for the industry.
So what's the comedy like at the club? Is it all branded with the Joe Rogan, carnivore diet?
Yeah, I mean, you would think, and when it first opened, people were like, oh, it's an anti-woke club, it's all going to be Rogan-style humor. In truth, it's not really like that. It's much more just like a anything goes comedy club. I mean, it's like whatever people are doing that's funny, you can get up there. Some of the humor is, political, but most of it's not.
So how's the club different than other comedy clubs that people would go to?
I mean, first of all, it's very hard to get into these days. I mean, that's part of why, another dozen clubs have opened up in Austin, because it's just really hard to get a ticket just to get in there. Additionally, it's kind of like Rogan's guys who are the headliners. There's a smaller room. And there's a whole system, a hierarchy in the club. If you get a job as a door guy, then you work at the club, then you can do the staff shows in the smaller room. If you really are successful there, maybe you'll get up to the top room. But it's kind of like, there are definitely like plenty of big performers, comedians around the country that will never go to the Comedy Mothership. It really is kind of like a place for Rogan, the people that are already in his inner circle, and the people that are desperate to get into his inner circle. Just
very briefly, you're not allowed to bring a phone or cameras or anything in,
yeah.
But they have cameras set up for a very special reason.
Yeah, because you're gonna start seeing more and more live shows on Netflix. Netflix just did their first live show. Brian Simpson did a live from the mothership. You'll see more of that. The whole place is wired so that they can do specials.
Well, it's a great story by Felix Gillette and Ashley Carmen. They write about Joe Rogan for Bloomberg Businessweek. Do check it out. You can read the story on the Bloomberg terminal and at bloomberg.com/businessweek. Felix, also the author of It's Not TV, The Spectacular Rise, Revolution, and Future of HBO, joining us here in New York. From New York to Washington, D.C. now for a check of the latest world and national news. We got Amy Morris in the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom. Hey, Amy.
Hi, Tim. Barack and Michelle Obama have endorsed Kamala Harris in the Democratic race for the White House.
We called to say Michelle and I couldn't be prouder to endorse you and to do everything we can to get you through this election and into the Oval Office.
Former President and First Lady released that video this morning showing Vice President Harris speaking on the phone with both of them. The Summer Games are underway after service on France's high-speed trains was disrupted by what officials are describing as coordinated sabotage ahead of the opening ceremonies. Jean-Pierre Farandot is the chief executive of France's state railways company, SNCF, and he says it's still too early to know who is responsible.
There's an inquiry running at the moment, so the police force are looking after, of course, the people who have committed this assault against the French network.
SNCF's Jean-Pierre Farandot, the Manhattan DA, meanwhile, urging a judge not to overturn Donald Trump's hush money conviction. State prosecutors claim the Supreme Court's July 1st decision on presidential immunity for official acts made as president have no bearing on Trump's conviction on charges that he falsified business records in New York. Trump's lawyers argue that certain pieces of evidence should not have been introduced during that hush money trial under the Supreme Court's new ruling. Trump, meanwhile, denies any wrongdoing. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg.
It's 2:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We've got just over an hour to go ahead of the closing bell. Stocks ripping higher. Every major group in the S&P 500 higher on bets that the Fed easing cycle will keep fueling corporate America, with the bull market broadening beyond a narrow group of companies. Right now, the S&P 500 index is up 65 points, advancing by 1.2%. The Dow closed to session highs up 698, up by about 1.7%, while NASDAQ is up 185 points now. For NASDAQ, a gain of 1.7%. The Russell 2000 up now by 1.4%. Dow Transport's up by 1.8%. 10-year, 4.19%. The 2-year yield, 4.38%. Gold is advancing $20 the ounce, up 0.9%. West Texas Intermediate crude, 76.85 a barrel, down 1.8%. And Bitcoin is rallying 3.3%, 62,423 on Bitcoin. Bristol Myers Squibb shares up 11%. It raised its 2024 profit forecast as demand for its new medicines suggested the company has gotten past a dip in performance. Again, Bristol Myers Squibb up now by 11%. Again, recapping, stocks higher. S&P up 62, up 1.1%. 10-year yield 4.19%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thanks so much for that update, Charlie. Do appreciate it. Well, you may have heard over the last month or so quite a bit of DEI news, at least on the corporate side. So just last week, Deere and Company, it's the world's largest top farm machinery maker, said that it was pulling back from diversity measures in the face of conservative criticism. It was the second ag-related company in less than a month to bend to such pressure. At the end of June, Tractor Supply, you might recall, said it was eliminating DEI roles and retiring DEI goals, quote, while still ensuring a respectful environment. So some companies are pulling back when it comes to DEI, and others are leaning into it, like the investment firm Illumin Capital. Darren Dodson is managing partner at Illumin Capital. It's a fund of funds that's working to achieve racial and gender equity across investing. Darren joins us from Oakland once again. Darren, good to have you back on the program with us. Good to see you. Illumin just received its annual report, or released its annual report. We're going to get to that in just a minute, but first, I got to get you to weigh in on what's happening on the corporate side, because at least at some companies, when it comes to DEI, we've seen the environment shift quite a bit over the last couple of years. How are you watching this?
Well, of course, our strategy at Illumin Capital is to address biases as a methodology for unlocking economic value. So those that are pulling away from DEI have to be really careful that they're not pulling away from returns, because that's exactly what our research in partnership with Stanford Spark shows, that as we address biases, we are able to see underlying returns that sometimes we miss if we don't address them, particularly racial biases, which we found that systematically Black fund managers that are outperforming are overlooked by asset allocators when they're trying to achieve the highest return. They basically go against their own training in selecting high-performing managers when race is present. So I think there's a lot of work for those that are moving away from DEI, particularly at that intersection of DEI and bias.
Do you think it's a mistake for companies, and I'm not talking about investment firms or firms that are making investments, but companies like Deere and like Tractor Supply, is it a mistake for them to distance themselves from DEI after getting criticism from customers?
Well, what we've found is that our investors that represent a number of the largest institutions and foundation endowments, pensions, others in the country are really excited to do the work to address these biases, because they believe that there's tremendous economic value on the other side of that. And that's also what our research in partnership with Stanford Spark shows. So I think that leaders of corporations would do well to also look at their biases and resource allocations. Of course, Daniel Kahneman won the Nobel Prize in this area in looking at systematic bias and resource allocation in firms. And when we look at the intersection of bias and the way that it shows up with women and people of color as they outperform, yes, there's some important work for leaders of companies to do in that area as well.
So tell us more about why you founded Illumin Capital, and what are you looking for if you're running a fund of funds when you're selecting different portfolio managers and different funds to invest in?
Well, we're looking for fund managers that much of the market is overlooking. So our research showed that as Black fund managers outperform, many miss that outperformance and basically fall back on their own biases. So when we tested leaders of university endowments that allocate large pools of capital, when we talked to sovereign wealth funds managers, and when we tested them for bias, we found systematically they went against their years and years of training and didn't select the highest performing managers, leaving money on the table. So in short, what we look for is high performing managers that others in the market overlook. And that's part of the reason why with our recent impact report that was referenced at the top of the program, we've found that our managers are about double the industry averages in terms of women partners, and also 4 times the industry average in terms of underrepresented people of color, where we believe that interrupting these biases and finding these overlooked and underestimated managers will result in continuing to create economic value for our investors.
Darren, do you think that because you're investing in what you call overlooked fund managers, you're able to invest at some sort of discount because the market's not actually taking into account what their performance is and what their performance could be?
I think that it's very similar to the way that Charlie Munger invests. When there's latent value in the market because others are overlooking it, and you partner with people to deliver on that latent value, that's a partnership. So we partner with our managers. We also have a unique program, the IQ proprietary training program, where we help them to identify companies and their underlying strategies that are also overlooked and underestimated. So we do a tremendous amount of work alongside of the funds that we select to ensure that they are also beating their biases and choosing the best companies in the marketplace as well.
What kind of evidence and research do you have that kind of shows a real connection between meaningful returns and portfolio outperformance and this DEI factor, we could call it?
I think the most substantial research, there's probably about 40 years showing the outperformance of managers of color and women-led firms done by the National Association of Investment Companies. And what was really unique about our research in collaboration with Stanford Spark and a number of the leading professors in the world in this particular area is that what we found is that not only was there years and years of outperformance, but there wasn't asset allocations to follow that outperformance of women and people of color managers. So we had to ask the question, why? And what we found in our research is that likely biases are interrupting people's ability to see high-performing Black-led funds, as we published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in a peer-reviewed paper. And that is really important information for those that are looking to make money in financial markets, is that if they're looking at their investment strategies and they're finding that they don't have women and people of color within their portfolio construction, they have more work to do to address their biases to ensure that they're not interrupting their opportunities for more returns over time.
Hey, Darren, just 30 seconds left. What's the fundraising environment like right now?
Well, this is one of the really interesting things, and thank you for asking the question. The fundraising environment is impacted by the increasing polarization due to the upcoming election.
Interesting.
High inflation, as we know, and everyone's awaiting the Fed's new words. But what we find is that at periods where there's a lot of market volatility and uncertainty like there is right now, that people increase their biases substantially. And those very things that led them to overlook and underestimate fund managers and entrepreneurs get exacerbated during periods of stress, like the period that we're in right now. So I guess what I would say is that it's even more important now to do the work to interrupt biases for those that are looking to meet their fiduciary duty and achieve higher returns than ever before.
Darren, we love it when you join us. Darren Dodson, managing partner at Illumin Capital. It's a fund of funds that's working to achieve racial and gender equity across investing. Darren joins us from Oakland, California. Coming up next, Options Insight with Abigail Doolittle. This is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg World headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet with a look at company news. Authorities are accusing the famed short seller Andrew Left of committing fraud through stock sales, social media posts, and research reports, their biggest move yet in a years-long crackdown against traders who tout their bearish bets. The SEC alleged that Left used his firm Citron to generate about $20 million in profits from illegal trading involving almost 24 companies. The Justice Department also announced a criminal case against Left, accusing him of securities fraud. Left had no immediate comment. Charter Communications shares surging today. Charter up now by 15.2% after the cable and wireless company reported revenue that beat analyst estimates, boosted by a surge in residential mobile service. Sales increased to $13.7 billion, beating the $13.6 billion average of analyst predictions. Growth was driven by a 37% increase in residential mobile service. Again, shares of Charter, they're up 15.2%. JP Morgan Chase has launched a generative artificial intelligence tool and told employees to think of it as a research analyst that can offer information, solutions, and advice. That's according to an internal memo that was viewed by Bloomberg. JP Morgan Chase up now by 1.8%. Dexcom shares are plunging after the company cut its full-year sales forecast for the glucose monitoring devices relied upon by diabetics. The San Diego-based medical device manufacturer said it expects revenue of $4 to $4.05 billion for 2024. That compares to an earlier estimate of $4.2 billion to $4.435 billion. Shares are trading lower by 41%. Those are our top company stories. This is Bloomberg.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week and Tim Stennebeck on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
It is Bloomberg Business Week. It's time now for Options Insight with Abigail Doolittle. She's joined by Brian Bending, President at MJP Wealth Advisors. Abigail, take it away.
Great. Thanks so much, Tim. And Brian, terrific to have you with us. This year, of course, similar to last year, big rally for stocks. I just noticed something very interesting, though, which is the S&P 500 on the year up 14.3%. The NASDAQ 100 up just about 13%. So big tech starting to underperform. And NVIDIA, which had been up as much as 190% of the year, right now up just a meager, and I say that jokingly, of course, up 128%. Do you think that stocks have more of a rally ahead? Is NVIDIA going to recover? The other big tech, the Magnificent Seven, going to recover from here? Or is this about as good as it gets? Or are we going to see a correction?
Thanks so much, Abigail. I think, second half of the year is all going to be about earnings. And, there's muscle memory, I think, with investors, especially as you start to see, today, for example, volatility down about 9%. Investors coming back to some of those bigger tech names and really a little bit more of a broadening today across all sectors. And I think right now we're in that period of time where investors are still a little bit cautious about their earnings outlooks, knowing that mega cap tech has really run pretty far. And you're right, valuations are stretched. But this AI innovation trend that the market is infatuated with, I think still is a multi-year trend. And so I still think mega cap tech, makes sense. But you have to be cautious. And I think also on the other side, you have a lot of stocks that really haven't participated in this year's rally and still even playing catch up from last year. I mean, about 35% or so of stocks are about negative on a year-to-date basis, and you still have a handful leading the markets higher. So if earnings outlooks hold, and I know we have some big earnings coming up next week, some talk from the Fed, I really think that gives a chance for this rally to continue.
Well, you just mentioned the Fed, and we also have jobs. So how do you expect that to play? Do you think there's any chance the Fed cuts next week, or what are your expectations, and on jobs as well?
Well, I think the Fed is going to hold steady on rates. I think they're going to continue with a similar dialogue of wanting to see the next two prints of inflation before that September meeting. So don't expect any cuts next week, but hopefully we start to get a little bit more of a hint on the direction of monetary policy with rates, because we did have an inflation number, one of their favorites, come in this morning that was really at or slightly below expectations in some areas of the numbers. And that really is what helped to fuel this bounce back today. So if we still see inflation cooling while at the same point in time having stability in the labor market, Abigail, I think we still can expect 1 to 2 cuts from the Fed between September and December. And that will help the markets and also cool some of these concerns around volatility.
Yes, volatility for sure. We have this VIX close to a 17 handle and well off those complacent 12 levels. Brian Vendig, president of MPJ Wealth Advisors, thanks so much for joining us for Options Insight. Tim, back to you.
Abigail Doolittle with Options Insight. Thanks so much, Abigail. Taking a look at the markets right now, the Dow up by 1.6%, the S&P 500 higher by a full percentage point, while the NASDAQ Composite up by 0.8%. If you are sticking with us on Bloomberg Business Week on radio, on YouTube, on Bloomberg Originals, we got a great program coming up for the next 2 hours. We're going to be joined by Matt Miller because he's going to talk to us all about his interview with GM President Mark Royce. They're talking about that new Corvette. Also, we got the 10 AI startups to watch in 2024. Plus, we're joined by the CEO who's built a moving company that started with 1 truck and now brings in $100 million a year. And Emily, this is what I'm looking forward to. Finally, I'll learn what Brat Summer means for the 2024 election.
You're going to learn.
I'm going to learn. That's going to do it for us on Bloomberg TV. Don't go anywhere. The close starts right now.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
It is Bloomberg Business Week live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. Streaming on YouTube and Bloomberg Originals, I'm Tim Stenevec along with Bloomberg News cross-asset reporter Emily Griffeo in for Carol Masser this afternoon. Emily, hours 2 and 3 coming right up.
Yeah, we got a big show ahead of us.
We really do. I'm excited about this one. Matt Miller, he went home though. He was here earlier today. I gave him a really hard time.
I was on his show earlier today, and I said, "Oh, I'll talk to you later."
And what did he say?
And he said, "Oh, I don't know
do
if
it from home?
I'm going to be in person."
Is it half day for Matt Miller? Is that what he does? He's going to join us on Zoom?
We should feel lucky that he's,
Oh, no.
even coming.
I'm
I mean,
not
where's
even-
Carol?
No, she has a day off. People deserve days off. This is not a day off for Matt Miller. Okay. But he's got a big interview with GM President Mark Royce. They talk about that new Corvette. So looking forward to that. Also, Rachel Metz is going to join us to give us the 10 AI startups to watch this year. Looking forward to that.
Yeah, and we're joined by the CEO who's built a moving company that started with 1 truck and now brings in $100 million a year. And Tim, I see these trucks everywhere. So once we get to that, we'll have a lot to talk about.
Can you tell me what brat means?
The Brat Summer. I feel like this trend is already getting outdone.
Yeah,
like on Monday,
like-
it was the hot thing, and now it's already...
It's Friday, so maybe next week I'll learn what it actually is.
Yes,
and,
exactly.
Make a fool of myself. All that and more coming up over the next couple of hours. First up, though, a check on the day's trade and top business stories. Here's Charlie Pelley.
Thank you very much indeed. From the Brats to the Bulls and the Bears, the Bulls firmly in control right now. Just under an hour to go ahead of that closing bell. We wrap up the week. What a week it has been. We've got the Dow right now up by 628 points. That is a gain of 1.6%. S&P 500 index up 52. That is a gain of 1%. And the NASDAQ Composite index up 131 now, up 0.8%. Broad-based rally. Russell 2000 index up by 1.3%. 10-year 4.19%. The 2-year 4.38%. Gold up $18 the ounce, higher by 0.8%. And West Texas Intermediate crude down 2.2% right now, 76.53 a barrel. Stock market getting a big boost at the end of a wild week after key economic data this morning bolstered speculation that the Fed will set up the stage for a rate cut in September. So what about this morning's economic data? How does that play into the timing of those potential Fed rate cuts? Cameron Dawson is Chief Investment Officer at New Edge Wealth.
Yeah, it's right in thin line in the sense that we don't have to pull forward rate cuts. We don't have to do 50 basis points in September. So it does give the Fed the ability to have a certain degree of patience, which we think is actually good for equities. Urgency would be bad. If you're cutting because you have to get those cuts in, that would be something we don't think risk assets would like.
Cameron Dawson of New Edge Wealth, keeping an eye on 3M shares. They are soaring the most in more than 36 years after raising its full-year profit forecast as its new CEO vows to reinvigorate the iconic manufacturer's innovation engine. 3M right now surging 21.3%. Again, recapping the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all higher. S&P up 51, a gain of 0.9%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thanks, Charlie. Do appreciate that. Well, as you just heard from Charlie, we're seeing the bulls in a charge today, with the NASDAQ up 0.7%, the S&P up 1%, and the Dow up 1.6%. For an idea of what exactly is going on with this broad-based acceleration, this broad-based buying, we bring in Abigail Doolittle, Chief Markets Correspondent for Bloomberg News. She joins us right here in the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. 432 names in the S&P 500 are in the green today. Only 71 are lower. Is the concern that we saw earlier this week, is that just a thing of the past?
I would say not. In the week, we have the S&P 500 down for a second week. We have the NASDAQ 100 down for a third week over that time period. This week, the NASDAQ 100 still down 2.9%. That's really pretty healthy, falling for a third week, again, below that 50-day moving average. Actually, let me confirm that. It had been below the 50-day moving average. It's on the 100-day moving average. So the big question is whether or not those medium-term support buyers, are they going to buy or not? The near-term dip buyers did not. They folded. It's unclear if they're going to come back. We have a ton of big earnings out. And I think that what we have seen is too far, too fast. Like when we think back on the Tesla quarter, that stock on the day was killed or it was sent sharply lower for earnings that were 14% light, but sales better by 3.5%. The actual cars that were sold sequentially higher and basically in the same zip code of the last several quarters. But the stock itself, from trough to peak, from the April bottom, had been up 95%. So that's what all of these stocks face, where if you don't put up a quarter of perfection, and yes, that was a messy quarter, but it was not nearly as bad as the decline. That's the kind of pressure that stocks face ahead. The one I'm noticing the most is NVIDIA.
Interesting. Okay.
So NVIDIA, that's a large cap, but I feel like we can't let you go without talking about small caps. Because this week, the Russell 2000 has been such a standout. It's actually now looking a little bit more in line with the action of the S&P 500 today, but it's still up 1.3% today. 3% on the week, and its third weekly gain. Is the momentum over? Like, did we see the bulk of that rotation into small cap, and now we're going to be seeing a more broad-based rally?
So great use of superlatives. I'm doing something that I love to do here on radio, which I sometimes feel like we should do on TV too, which is live charting. So I've actually not looked at the Russell 2000 chart in probably 2 or 3 weeks despite this rally because it's so behind the other indexes. So it's broken out of this little range. It could flag higher toward its all-time high, because that's something that people don't remember. Its all-time high is back in 2021. It's still down a good 5 to 10% from that all-time high. One reason to think that we're going to see this small cap rally drop is the RSI went from extreme overbought to now at a 66. So the extreme overbought level at 82, which means that it's interesting because in some ways it's healthy. Today's rally, it's slightly lower than the last high last week, which means that the momentum is coordinated in a little bit more of an orderly way than we've seen for, say, NVIDIA and the big cap stocks. But I would say that this rally is going to probably cool. It is absolutely parabolic in nature. Per physics, a parabolic trend cannot hold. It's a right angle. So it will collapse. The only exception to that I've seen in my career is Tesla back in 2014, that parabolic uptrend. And that was a public call that I had made at that time when I was on Wall Street. It never reversed. But gold, silver, anything else, they always give back. It's physics.
A couple other stocks that I want to get your take on.
Sure.
3M.
Yes, 3M.
Up
Best
21%
day since 1980 ever.
But
yes,
Dexcom.
Down
41%.
Yes.
Now 41.5%.
That tells...
It's like a tale of two different
really is.
moves.
So starting out with 3M, I think that's a big relief rally. This company has been in a world of hurt for a long time in terms of legal situations. Many of them they've settled through, they've resolved or are in the process of resolving through settlement. But the numbers are actually pretty good too. They have a new CEO, Mike Brown. He stepped in March. And I think that this rally is a vote of confidence for Mike Brown, the idea that he has started to turn this company around, free cash flow beneath the surface, margins are looking good. He's talking about growth. They're also talking about product development. So investors are sighing some relief. The one thing I would say from a technical standpoint, this stock is super interesting. It's right at resistance. So whether or not it can break through, they'll have to continue to put up. Dexcom, quite frankly, I'm less familiar with the story. It's a med tech company. They missed the numbers. The stock is absolutely puking. It is below all levels.
Missing number. I mean, I looked at the results and it wasn't like they missed them by 60%.
But it was also the the unexpected cut to the 2024 sales forecast. So if I'm just going to take a quick, because a lot of times, we in the media like to look at the story, but price generally will tell you the story better than any actual story can. So it's interesting, actually. Investors were preparing for this. This stock, unlike the market, is down from April. It was down into this quarter, so there was some chatter that they were not going to have it all together, down about 20% from that time period. But it just looks like this cut of guidance, just an absolute surprise to the street. You probably had some big holders. I'm going to use the OWN function on the Bloomberg right now to see who the top shareholders are. But you probably had some big holders absolutely puke it out. Just get rid of the whole position on the day, as opposed to try to sell it in an orderly way where they wouldn't disrupt themselves so much. Again, I'm not so familiar with the fundamentals of that story, but it just looks, the chart tells you people who own this and analysts absolutely shocked. They want out. They want nothing to do with it.
We'll find out next quarter who.
Yes, or a few quarters. I mean, this is the kind of story that it could take a while.
Or I want to know who changed positions.
Yes. Interesting. Yeah, we'll have to watch that on 13F Day for sure. I mean, right now at the top, it's all the big players: Vanguard, BlackRock, Capital Group, State Street. It could be some smaller ones below, but I get. People are just selling this thing in size. I mean, the volume is out of control. I'm gonna actually take a quick look at the volume and try to describe to our audience. Yeah, I mean, the average volume on this thing is maybe about, it looks like it had been, prior to today, it had been 1.7 million shares per day. Today, 45 million shares have traded hands.
All right. Abigail Doolittle, Chief Markets Correspondent at Bloomberg News, joining us here in the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. This is Business Week. Well, GM unveiled the newest version of America's sports car at a party in Miami on July 25th, yesterday, on a wave of success, basking in record revenue bolstered by strong demand for gas-powered trucks and SUVs. We're talking about the 2025 Chevrolet Corvette ZR1, 1,064 horsepower, 828 pound-feet of torque, 5.5-liter twin-turbo V8 engine. You know who doesn't need to hear any of that? Is Matt Miller, because he's co-host of Open Interest on Bloomberg TV and the co-host of the Hot Pursuits podcast. He knows everything about the 2025 Chevrolet Corvette ZR1. Matt joins us from New York. So Matt, you and Hannah interviewed Mark Royce, president of GM, for the Hot Pursuits podcast, all about the ZR1. Have you driven this thing?
I have not driven the ZR1, and actually Mark Royce, who had just gotten off the track test driving a pre-production prototype of it, was also driving something that isn't yet in production or for sale, right? So they don't let journalists drive cars until they have produced them enough to give to dealers and to start giving them to consumers. But I have driven a number of other Corvettes, from the C6 to the C7 to the C8. I've driven the E-Ray most recently, which is a hybrid version, the first four-wheel drive version of the Corvette. But this thing is on a completely another level. I mean, as you said, over 1,000 horsepower. It's the first time they've ever turbocharged a Corvette. Typically, a ZR1 would be a supercharged version of the Z06. It would be the top of the line, the Apex Predator. But it's really a remarkable vehicle. And for this Corvette, they designed the thing with the ZR1 in mind from the very beginning. Although obviously the most popular seller is the much lower priced Stingray model, which has a normal, 6.2 liter naturally aspirated V8. This thing is, they basically ordered a Ferrari 458, took that engine apart, figured out exactly what Ferrari does, built a better, bigger version for the Corvette, and then put turbochargers on it. So it's pretty amazing.
And the design is different as well. You write that it has a split window, which we haven't seen in Corvettes since the 60s, right?
Yeah, exactly. They put a split window in the back as a callback to the C2, the second generation Corvette in the 1960s. Back then they had to do it because they didn't have the technology to build a curved windshield in the size that they needed. So they had to put it into two pieces. Now it's almost a style element, although it does actually extract heat from the engine. Don't forget that this 8th generation of Corvettes has the engine behind the driver for the first time ever. Typically, a Corvette was a front-engine sports car, but it's a really cool style element that only the ZR1 gets, and possibly the rumored Zora will get it. So normally the ZR1 is the top of the Corvette pyramid, but there's a rumor that they're going to go even a step further than adding turbochargers to the V8 behind you, and that they're going to put an electric motor in the front of this thing, which will give it even more horsepower and all-wheel drive. But we haven't confirmed those rumors yet.
Okay, well, I want to go, as I mentioned, to you and Hannah had Mark Royce on Hot Pursuit, your podcast. Let's go to a clip of him speaking to the two of you. Here
Corvette and C8 is designed from day one to be accessible to a lot of different folks at different price points. And, right now we've got 50% of the market in sports cars. So, we're doing it very profitably. So I'd say we have the formula pretty well understood. And, I want everybody to be able to enjoy these cars. And, I don't think Corvette or Chevrolet stands for anything else. It's not farmed out. It's not made somewhere else. It's not, $500,000. It's none of that. It's a pretty thoughtful progression in price that matches the performance.
That's GM President Mark Royce on the Hot Pursuit podcast. Matt, he wants everyone to be able to enjoy Corvette. What are we talking in terms of how much this thing costs?
All right, so he hasn't given us the ZR1 price yet, and they don't, frankly, have a price yet, right? It's not coming out until 2025. As I said, he drove a pre-production vehicle. But you can already buy the base model of the 8th generation Corvette, the C8 Stingray, for as little as 65 grand, basically. The price goes up from there, as he said, depending on, the performance that you want. If you step up from the 495 horsepower Stingray, you can go to the 655 horsepower E-Ray. That's the hybrid model that I drove with all-wheel drive. It does 0 to 60, by the way, in 2.5 seconds, and it'll beat any Ferrari or Lamborghini in a drag race, which actually Haggerty has done a drag race with those cars. Then you can go to the Z06, which is currently the highest power model they sell, with well over 700 horsepower, and that's a naturally aspirated flat plane crank, so it'll sound exactly like a Ferrari. That'll cost you about $120,000 to start, and I imagine that this is going to be substantially more expensive. So probably, I would guess, around $150,000, and then when you put options on it, it climbs quickly. But it still is so much cheaper than any comparable Ferrari or Lamborghini, and in a lot of ways, I would argue better than any of those Italian supercars, which is what makes it really so unbelievable in terms of value for performance.
Okay, is this why GM stock is up 23% year to date, and then you look at something like Ford down 7%?
Well, Ford had obviously the most horrible drop in its stock price a couple of days ago that we've seen since 2008. So imagine how bad that is. Ford stock fell the most since they had to mortgage the Blue Oval in order to avoid bankruptcy. That's how bad their earnings report was, right? And you've had a lot of other car makers with really bad earnings reports as well. Stellantis said profit was down by almost half in the first 6 months of the year, and that they might even have to close brands like put Chrysler or Dodge out of business. On the other hand, General Motors had a fantastic earnings report earlier this month. It wasn't specifically because of the Corvette. It's really because of the high-end pickup trucks that they sell. They sold 230,000 Silverados and Sierras, and they were actually able to raise their forecast for profit for the full year to $15 billion. So GM has done a lot better than their competitors. But if you looked at the stock price before this week, it wasn't so divergent.
Matt Miller, he is the co-host of Open Interest on Bloomberg TV, also the co-host of the Hot Pursuits podcast. He joins us from New York. Matt, have a great weekend. You can come talk cars with us anytime. Do appreciate that. Coming up next, we are joined by the executive director of BlackPack.
It's 3:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We got 39 minutes to go ahead of the closing bell with the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ 100 index, Russell 2000, all up. Today we've got the S&P pushing higher by 1.1%, higher by 58 points. The S&P at 54.57. Dow Industrials up 693 points. That's a gain of 1.7%. NASDAQ up 148, up 0.9%. The Russell 2000 up 32 points, higher by 1.5%. 10-year yield at 4.19%. The 2-year now 4.38%. Spot gold up $21 the ounce to $23.85, a gain of 0.9%. And West Texas Intermediate crude oil down 2%, $76.69 for a barrel of WTI. U.S. stock market did get a big boost at the end of a wild week after key economic data bolstered speculation that the Fed will set the stage for a rate cut in September. In the meantime, investors have one eye on the economic data, the other on earnings. Caterina Simonetti is Senior Vice President for Private Wealth at Morgan Stanley.
The factor that weighs on the market more than anything is us going into the election season, and the presidential elections, as we know historically, come with a lot of uncertainty and a lot of volatility. So we are optimistic about the fact that we are going to see the rate cuts and that the economy is starting to recover in the areas, outside of Max 7.
Morgan Stanley's Caterina Simonetti. Sources tell Bloomberg Honeywell International is considering an IPO of its majority-owned quantum computing firm, Quantinuum, as soon as next year. Today, we got Honeywell up by 0.2%. So again, recapping a Friday rally holding, S&P up 58, up now by 1.1%, 10-year 4.19%, the 2-year 4.38%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Charlie, thanks so much for that. Do appreciate it. Well, Barack and Michelle Obama endorsed Kamala Harris's bid to become the Democratic nominee this morning. The former president and first lady offered their support for Harris to follow in Obama's footsteps as only the second black president in U.S. history. Here's a video which Barack Obama tweeted out this morning at 5 a.m.
Kamala.
Hello. Hi.
Hey there.
Oh, hi. You're both together. Oh, it's good to hear you both.
I can't have this phone call without saying to my girl Kamala, I am proud of you. This is going to be historic.
We called to say Michelle and I couldn't be prouder to endorse you and to do everything we can to get you through this election and into the Oval Office.
Oh, my goodness. Michelle, Barack, this means so much to me.
That announcement from the Obamas follows a whirlwind 2 days, during which Harris secured enough pledged delegates to secure the nominees, raised over $130 million, and met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Adrian Shropshire is executive director of Black PAC. It's a Democratic political action committee that's focused on mobilizing and engaging with African-American voters. She joins us now from Los Angeles. Adrian, I'm wondering, in your view, how big of a deal the Obama's endorsement is to Vice President Harris?
I imagine that it's a pretty big deal. I think both to the vice president, just having that support, in addition to the support from Democratic leaders, across the spectrum. But I also think it's a really big deal for voters. Obviously, President Obama and Michelle Obama, have really high favorability, as we say, among voters. They're very popular. And I think that for Black voters in particular, who showed up for President Obama in historic numbers for his campaigns, it means a lot in terms of just having that sort of final endorsement in place and people really feeling like now, they can get ready to go.
So what do the next few months look like, Adrian? Because we really don't have a lot of time left until the election. What kind of challenges do you anticipate in terms of getting voters to now mobilize around a candidate that just very recently came, into this race?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that the good news, right, is that Vice President Harris is not unknown. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think part of the challenge with what we were hearing, from inside circles in the Democratic Party about, the potential of going to an open primary and to, sort of extending the internal debate and frankly chaos, that would have been more challenging, right? The Vice President is not unknown. She's been vetted not only from her own presidential campaign, but through the 2020 election, through the last 4 years of the administration. So she's not unknown. And in fact, we've seen in our polling and even in the door knocking that we've been doing over the last few days, we made this sort of pivot. Folks are very much aware of who she is, and we're seeing lots of excitement. I don't think that the challenges, are very different than the challenges that we were facing 3 weeks ago, which is, voters, a lot of voters, particularly Black voters that we're talking to, need to know because they don't have a real sense of the accomplishments of the administration. They need to understand the accomplishments that the Biden-Harris administration had that the vice president was directly involved with. We hear from folks that they don't know a lot about what she's done over the last 4 years. So she will need to tell that story. The campaign will need to tell that story. We will need to tell that story. But I think that is, not different, right, from what we were facing before. Getting the information out there, telling her story. I think a lot of voters still don't know about her biography and want to know about her backstory. So I think that they need to tell that story. They also just need to continue with the contrast that they've been doing and making the stakes of the election very clear about where we have the potential to go as America, as a democracy that is, toward that more perfect union or toward, an America that, is continues to sort of push divisiveness and rhetoric that is, not taking us to the future, but taking us back.
Adrienne, one thing that we've seen in polls in recent months, and this is before Kamala Harris was at the top of the ticket, it becoming the presumptive nominee, is that although we can't really say that former President Trump is popular with Black voters, he has picked up Black voters since, at least according to some polls, since leaving office, becoming more popular with them. I'm wondering what your polling shows in terms of how that could shift now that Kamala Harris is in the race.
Mm-hmm. So, I'd say a couple things about those polls. One is it really is unfortunate that when we see national polls that really capture the headlines, particularly about Black voters, it's unfortunate that the sample size of those polls are so small. And I think that does a disservice not only to people's understanding of the race, but the electorate and how it is moving. When in our research and in our polling, which are much larger, much more robust sample sizes, we do not see that kind of shift in support among Black voters. And that is across demographic within the Black electorate, regardless of gender, regardless of age. We see the same level of support for Trump that we saw on the election day in 2020 and on election day in 2016, which is under 10%. So we have not seen those kinds of shifts. We haven't seen them in our polling. We haven't seen them in our focus groups, and we definitely haven't seen them in the conversations that we've had on the doors. I don't think that means, though, that, this is sort of an easy, sort of shoe-in terms of mobilizing and exciting the Black electorate for the vice president. I think that there's a lot of work to be done, that there's a lot of conversations that they need to have with Black voters, both to help Black voters understand her vision for the future, house problems, that sort of intractable problems that people are feeling very deeply, whether it's the cost of living or it's crime, those sorts of issues that are really burdening people. They need to tell the story about how they're going to address those issues. But I have not seen in any of our research the kinds of dramatic shifts that I know that we've seen in headlines and papers over the last few months.
What have you seen in terms of what the Harris campaign can talk about? What has been a strong policy that has resonated with the Black voters that you interact with?
Mm-hmm. There's a lot. I would say that Black voters have a lot of issue angst. There's a lot of issues that people are concerned about, and I just named some of them, whether it's crime or the cost of living, healthcare, education, rights, and the erosion of rights. So there's a lot of issues that folks are concerned about, and those issues, those top issues are generally the same across the battleground states where we're operating. The top issue might be different in Philadelphia than it is in Wilmington, North Carolina, but the top issues are generally the same. When we ask people what issues are going to motivate them to the polls, the issues that they say I'm going to go and vote because this issue matters so much to me. Those are things that are really tied to people feeling like our rights are being taken away, that they're deeply concerned about the Supreme Court decisions, whether it's decisions on voting rights, whether it's reproductive rights, whether it is affirmative action. Those are issues that people are very concerned about. People are concerned about the rise in white supremacy. They're concerned about hate crimes. People feeling very, personally like they might be a victim of a hate crime. So people are worried about the divisiveness and the divisive rhetoric in the country. And so I think it's those issues. There's a set of issues that people are deeply concerned about. People do not want to lose more rights. They're worried about the direction of the country. And those are the things that are going to motivate people to show up to the polls.
Adrian, thanks so much for joining us. Do appreciate it. Adrian Shropshire is Executive Director of Black PAC, a Democratic political action committee. It's focused on mobilizing and engaging with African-American voters, joining us from Los Angeles this afternoon. Well, we are about a half hour away from the close. The S&P up a full percentage point, while the Dow Jones Industrial Average up by 1.6%. The NASDAQ Composite up by 0.8%. Let's get to world and national news with Amy Morris in the Bloomberg 99.1 Newsroom in D.C. Hey, Amy.
Hi, Tim. The opening ceremony of the 2024 Paris Summer Games is underway. Actually, it started a couple of hours ago, but overnight there was what investigators describe as a coordinated act of sabotage, crippling the country's high-speed rail network. Paris prosecutors have opened an investigation, but Bloomberg French transport reporter Albertina Torsoli reports there's no official word on who could be behind this.
There's an inquiry running at the moment, so the police force are looking after, of course, the people who have committed this assault against the French network.
Meanwhile, Barack and Michelle Obama endorsing Kamala Harris in the Democratic race for president. The former president and First Lady released a video this morning showing Vice President Harris speaking with them via telephone.
I am looking forward to doing this with the two of you, Doug and I both, and getting out there, being on the road. But most of all, I just want to tell you the words you have spoken and the friendship that you have given over all these years mean more than I can express. So thank you both.
In a joint statement that announced the endorsement, the Obamas said that they have no doubt Harris has what it takes to win the election in November. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu got a warm greeting from Donald Trump at the start of their meeting in Florida, where Netanyahu says he is eager for a ceasefire deal.
I hope so, but I think time will tell. We're certainly eager to have one, and we're working on it. I think there's been some movement because of the military pressure that we exerted. I hope that there will be sufficient movement to get the deal completed.
And former President Donald Trump called for the release of the hostages. All of this less than just one day after the Israeli leader received a not-so-veiled rebuke from presidential candidate Kamala Harris in Washington. Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg.
It's 3:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We got a substantial rally heading into the weekend. 20 minutes to go ahead of the closing bell. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ 100 index, Russell 2000 all ripping higher. Let's head right over to the first word breaking news desk for today's afternoon call. Here he is, Bill Maloney.
And good afternoon, Charlie. That's right. U.S. stocks with a bid from the start today, with the Dow currently up 621 points. The S&Ps are higher by 56, while NASDAQ gains 0.9%. The U.S. 10-year yield at 4.19%. Gold is up 20. Oil trading in the red, but Bitcoin, that's higher by 3.7%. Among the main 11 S&P sectors, all were trading in the green, led by gains in industrials and real estate. Leaders to the upside in the Dow, 3M and Visa, while Walmart led to the downside. After earnings, 3M soared at 21%. It's having its best day since 1987. While Dexcom fell as much as 42% after its results. In deal news, Tech Resources is drawing M&A attention, and wrapping things up, McDonald's reports before the opening bell on Monday. Live from the first breaking news desk, I'm Bill Maloney. Charlie?
Okay, we thank you very much, Bill Maloney. Have a great weekend. Here, live breaking news over your Bloomberg. Type Squawk, SQUA, on your Bloomberg terminal. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
I'm driving in my car. I turn on the radio.
How about you let me drive?
Oh, no. Who's gonna drive you home? Honey, please, I'll do the driving. Drive on. Excuse me, I want to drive. It's the question that drives us.
This is the Drive to the Close.
That funky music will drive us till the dawn.
On Bloomberg Radio.
Well, look at that. Less than 22 minutes to go until less than 18 minutes to go.
Yeah.
You gotta look at the clock more. Less than 18 minutes to go to the end of trading on this Friday afternoon. We just heard the numbers from Charlie, but they're worth repeating. We're seeing a rally underway with the NASDAQ composite up close to 1%, the S&P 500 up just over 1%, while the Dow is up 1.6%. Let's see what Lance Cannon has to say about all this. He's portfolio manager at Hood River Capital Management, joining us from Palm Beach Gardens, Florida. Lance, you manage the Hood River International Opportunity Fund, which this year is up close to 14%. It puts it in the 94th percentile of its peers. Good to have you with us. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks. Good to be back.
Good to have you with us. Hey, we had a pretty big sell-off this week, and we're actually likely going to see, depending on how things close, another down week for the NASDAQ 100 and the S&P 500. The rotation continues into small caps. How are you looking at the environment right now?
So we're very constructive on small cap, as you might imagine, being a small cap manager. But we actually see a lot of data points that would give us reason to be excited about the opportunities over the next 12 months, particularly given the fact that look at your small cap indexes relative to the large cap indexes or their equivalent peers. They historically have traded at premiums relative to the larger indexes, but right now these small cap indexes, whether it's international or domestic, are trading at equivalent or even below. And we think that rotation that you mentioned earlier is going to continue to happen as we continue to see these opportunities. And the large reason why that's happening is because you've got high quality companies going to be delivering earnings revisions that are going to be positive, and people are going to see those opportunities and see that these are undervalued opportunities and want to rotate into those type of situations.
So what exactly has to happen in the macro environment to keep the small cap rally sustainable that hasn't happened already? Because I always think of, small caps when economic growth is doing well, small caps will rally, but the economy is doing pretty well, and it has been for the last several months. So what happens now that propels the rally further and keeps it?
It's a great question. I don't know if there's anything necessarily that's going to happen that's very unique or specific, as much as it's just the consistency that you will continue to see out of small caps, right? So again, we're talking about, we look for high quality companies. We want to be invested in over a period of time. They're being run by phenomenal management teams. These guys have been doing the same thing that you've been talking about during this economic period, where they've been delivering, but they've been overshadowed by these larger players. As those shadows tend to fade, we think that they're going to start to shine and be able to be seen. And there'll be more managers that rotate down that direction, just kind of giving the opportunity that they see where these are undervalued situations relative to their larger peers. I think Viking Holdings would be a great example of something like that we kind of already seen here more recently. This is a cruise operator that has historically been doing a lot of stuff in the rivers. and mostly in Europe, but has made a shift here to the U.S.
I think a lot of people are familiar with the marketing, Viking River Cruises, right?
Yeah, if you haven't seen it yet, you probably will now.
Exactly.
But they've been doing a lot. They've been doing really great in the river side, on the river kind of cruises type thing. They're making a push now into ocean as well. And people are gravitating towards this because they have the great experiences there. We think they're going to grow at twice the rate of what the industry is going to be growing. So you can imagine they're either taking share or they're creating share in the marketplace, but then they're also expanding their margins. We think they're going to do this at a rate that's much higher than what expectations are out there, and that will lead to a stock that will continue to appreciate going forward.
Lance, how long do you think we'll see small caps outperform in your view? Because it's been a lot of years where they haven't.
I wish I had a crystal ball to tell you how long that will be, but I'm pretty positive on it. I think that the market is starting to recognize that these things have been undervalued for quite a while now. That these are not just junk companies that are down here in small cap land, but they're high quality businesses to be had, opportunities to take advantage of. I think that one of the things that sets us apart too is just the ability to identify those high quality businesses. And so you don't get necessarily all the riffraff down here when you're investing in a Hood River type fund, just because you're looking at high quality businesses being run by high quality individuals. And that will lead you to see hopefully longer term returns that are better than what the index is putting out there.
What about on a sector level? What is interesting to you right now?
I think obviously there's a lot of stuff happening out in the AI world. Small cap has a lot of opportunities in which you can participate in the development of artificial intelligence and the things that are happening in that space, whether it's in the data center side. You can even do stuff on the semiconductor aspect of things as well. And then another area that I think is pretty interesting too is just this idea of moving things online. So one of the companies that we really like in the international fund is this company by the name of Red Care Pharmacy out of Germany. This is an online pharmacy dealer, or they own online pharmacy stores, throughout Europe. But Germany just made it a case where they're now allowing you to actually order your prescription drugs online.
Wait, that wasn't allowed before?
It was not allowed before. You had to go to a doctor and get it signed. It had to be handwritten, had to be taken to the pharmacy, delivered by hand. So now you can actually go online, you can order it and do it all electronically, right? So you can have an e-visit type thing in theory.
I've heard of these.
The doctor could then prescribe you. Yeah, I'm sure you have. Maybe you've done one.
Yeah,
I don't know if you
interesting.
One.
They have the fast and on the fast trains, but
they
we have
had to do
the e-visits.
You had to get medicine by hand in 2024.
Yes.
You did, yeah. So as of May 6th, it all kind of shifted, right? And so we got our first look in the Q2 results as to what happened there, and they saw a 35% sequential growth rate in the e-subscription business, and we think that's going to continue and be the real driver of the growth. Meanwhile, all the other stuff in a pharmacy now you can buy online as well. Over there, they're seeing that part of the business continue to grow at a 20% clip. The street's looking for 20% total growth for next year. We think this is going to continue to be a main driver, just kind of given the size of the prescription business in Germany is $65 billion, and less than 1% of that is penetrated today. Most countries in Europe that have moved this way, where they are allowing e-prescriptions, they're seeing a 25% penetration rate. So to go from 1 to 25%, that's a big chunk of cash that is to be had by these guys.
Lance, we have a Fed meeting coming up.
Oh, we do? Yeah, next Tuesday, Wednesday?
Next Tuesday, Wednesday. So I'd love to get your thoughts. Well, it felt like this week we heard a lot of people say that the Fed needs to be cutting sooner rather than later.
We did have a couple of prominent voices come out and say that.
Bill Dudley saying, let's do a cut right now in July. What are your thoughts? What are you expecting Powell to come out and talk about?
I think there's a lot of people that would love to see that happen. Mm-hmm. We are not necessarily planning on that, nor do we position the portfolio to take advantage of any type of macro type of environment. We're bottom-up fundamentalists at the end of the day. We're looking for long-term opportunities that we believe the fundamentals are there, regardless of what's happening from a macro standpoint. So I'd like to say we're macro-aware, but we're not macro-driven. So in terms of like what happens next week with the Fed, hopefully, they're seeing some of the same stuff that I think others are starting to see, and maybe that is voiced in a certain way that gives us some confidence, but it's not necessarily something that I'm spending a lot of time trying to position the portfolio around at this juncture.
I'm spending a lot of time thinking about it.
So. I'm spending a lot of time thinking about that view that Lance has out of his backyard. Looks like he's right on the water.
I wish this was my backyard. This is, yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, wherever you are, that's where we want to be.
Looks beautiful.
Lance Cannon, portfolio manager, Hood River Capital Management, joining us from Palm Beach Gardens, Florida, on this Friday afternoon. Coming up next, we count you down to the close and take you beyond the bell for the closing bell. This is Bloomberg.
company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. 3M shares up the most in more than 36 years after raising its full-year profit forecast as its new CEO vows to reinvigorate the iconic manufacturer's innovation engine. The gains came after the maker of Post-it notes and industrial adhesives said adjusted earnings this year will be between $7 and $7.30 a share as it reported second quarter results that boosted the midpoint of 3M's forecast to $7.15, up 10 cents from its previous outlook. 3M shares, they are moving higher. 3M up now by 23.2%. Bristol Myers Squibb has raised its 2024 profit forecast after demand for the company's new medicines helped it beat Wall Street's second quarter sales estimates. Bristol Myers Squibb up by 11%. And with more on the quarter, here's Bloomberg's Kimberly Adams.
Charlie, the New Jersey-based drug maker, says adjusted earnings for the full year will be between 60 cents and 90 cents per share, an increase of 20 cents at the midpoint from its prior projection. All of its biggest medicines beat sales expectations in the second quarter, pushing adjusted earnings to $2.07 per share. The quarterly performance marks a change in the company's near-term outlook after questions swirled about its future growth as key drugs face stiff competition and new pricing pressure. The company also says a cost-cutting initiative launched earlier this year is starting to pay off. Charlie?
And that's our Kimberly Adams reporting. Authorities are accusing famed short seller Andrew Left of committing fraud through stock trades, social media posts, and research reports. No immediate comment from Andrew Left. Stocks higher. We'll recap markets coming up. This is Bloomberg, and those are our top company stories. I'm Charlie Pellet, Bloomberg Radio.
This is Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Messer and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
It is Bloomberg Business Week. Only 5 minutes to go until the close on this Friday. Tim Stenevec and Emily Grafeo in for Carol Messer this afternoon. Emily, a couple stories. Well, one story. It's among the most read on the Bloomberg terminal today. A lot of questions about how AI is being integrated into companies that are not AI focused, so right. These so-called traditional companies. And JP Morgan has given us an idea of at least what they're doing in the early part of this.
They're giving their employees an AI tool, right? I had to read this.
Is it like, do they hand you a tool? This is your AI.
Here it is.
Here's
you
your
meet
AI.
with it.
No.
It's like, looks like Wall-E. No, they've launched a generative AI tool and told employees to think of it as a research analyst that can offer information, solutions, and advice. This is according to an internal memo viewed by Bloomberg, and it's giving many employees in the asset and wealth management division access to essentially its own version of OpenAI's ChatGPT called LLM Suite. It helps with writing, idea generation, problem solving, all of the things that the summer interns do. Now the AI is doing.
I was going to say, does it replace any jobs yet? We should note that it doesn't contain specific asset and wealth management division knowledge and is meant for general purpose productivity, according to the memo.
I feel like this is you hear this a lot with AI. People who defend AI, they say, oh, it's going to enhance our job. It's not going to replace our job. So I'm assuming that's what the JP Morgan employees.
Do you remember Jamie Dimon has likened AI to the steam engine? Like that's how he says, he's like, here's your steam engine. Mm-hmm. Here's your steam engin.
And the internet as well.
So this is probably just the beginning.
I wouldn't bet against Jamie Dimon. JP Morgan's a pretty big bank.
Yeah, I know. And I'm just wondering what they end up doing, if this is the beginning of it, what they end up doing. And I think we'll see more banks do this with their own versions.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And of course, if it increases the productivity, maybe takes the load off of those long working hours.
Bank of America is trying to do this, at least from the perspective of a customer-facing digital assistant. Mm-hmm. I know that. I've seen the marketing around that. Interesting stuff. Check out this story and more on the Bloomberg terminal about how JP Morgan has given its staff AI-powered research analyst chatbot. Coming up next, we're joined by our Bloomberg TV team for our cross-platform coverage on radio, TV, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals. We are going to count you down to the close on this Friday afternoon, where we're seeing a rally underway across the indices. The closing bell starts now.
The Closing Bell, Bloomberg's comprehensive cross-platform coverage of the U.S. market close, starts right now.
And right now, we are 2 minutes away from the end of the trading day. Romaine Bostic alongside Alex Steele, taking you through the Closing Bell, a global simulcast. It starts right now. Scarlet Fu joining us in the TV studio. Tim Stenovic in the radio booth. Carol Masser off today. Emily Grafeo filling in today for Carol on what is just a monumental day and a monumental week, Tim, when we talk about this rotation and, more importantly, the idea that investors really do have some newfound confidence that they're finally going to get those rate cuts.
Yeah, I mean, I think the data certainly helped this morning. No rate cut next week necessarily at the July Fed meeting. But still, like you said, that rotation continuing. We're seeing the Dow outperforming the Russell 2000, but the Russell outperforming the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ, not just on the week significantly, but on the day today too, Emily.
That's right. That rotation trade is fully underway, but we are still seeing strength in the mega caps in the S&P 500. But year to date, that NASDAQ 100 now lower than the S&P 500's year to date gains.
So it feels like next week will be a really big test, right? Because you've got a big chunk of the rest of the Mag 7 reporting. For those who think that the NASDAQ's underperformance is an early warning sign of things to come, hopefully they're relying on these earnings reports to help answer that question, whether it is or whether this is just a buying opportunity.
I don't know. I keep hearing on the street, I was just telling Romaine this, that value at risk model for a lot of these systemic funds like CTAs, for example, are still getting hit. So it is surprising that we're not seeing more selling today after yesterday.
Yeah, absolutely here. But a pretty broad-based rally that we have on our hands here today with all the major indices holding in the green, with the majority of the stocks in each one of those indices posting significant gains on the day. A Dow Jones Industrial Average higher by roughly around 660 points, or about 1.7% on the day. The S&P 500 is going to close higher by about 60 points, or 1.1%, while the NASDAQ Composite up 1% on the day. Similar moves for the NASDAQ 100. But your outperformer, modest outperformance, remains the small and mid caps. S&P 400 mid caps up 1.6%. The Russell 2000, Tim and Emily, up 1.7.
Yeah, majority, I think it's fair to say the vast majority of stocks, at least in the S&P 500, moving to the upside today. You got more than 4 stocks higher for every 1 stock that's lower. 438 in the green, 62 in the red in the S&P 500, Scarlett.
And the IMAP is going to show you a green pizza pie. There's no tomato sauce here because all 11 groups, are in the green. Oh, okay. I mean, this is a salad pizza, really. That's what it is.
I see a little bit of red.
Higher. Okay, you want to know what that is?
What is it?
Autos and components down 1/4%, and telecom services down 1/5 of 1%.
I feel bad for whoever has to do decliners today. No, there are some big ones. Okay.
That was a drum roll to him.
It was.
It wasn't me. I don't have to do decliners.
Okay. You're doing gainers. Go for it. What do you want to choose from?
I really do feel bad. Okay. You want me to do the gainers?
Do the gainers.
Okay, I'll do the gainers. I do want to start with shares of 3M, ticker MMM. Look at that, up 23%, having their best day ever. Second quarter net sales beat estimates. The company lifted the lower end of its full-year earnings forecast. The results are the first under Bill Brown, the CEO, who succeeded Mike Roman. That was just back on May 1st. Brown inherited a much smaller 3M following the spinoff of the huge healthcare products division unit. That was amid massive legal liabilities. 23%, the biggest advance going all the way back to 1980. Bristol Myers Squibb, another one that was higher by double digits today. The company up 11.44% after it raised its 2024 profit forecast. Demand for new medicine suggested the company has gotten past that dip in performance. Adjusted earnings for the full year are going to be between 60 to 90 cents a share, an increase of 20 cents at the midpoint of its prior projection. And finally, Newell Brands, it's the parent company of Coleman, Yankee Candle, Sharpie, Rubbermaid, Crock-Pot, Baby Jogger, and many, many more, climbed the most ever to its highest intraday since September of last year, up more than 40% today. This after the company posted a second quarter profit beat, also raised its yearly outlook. The second quarter gross margin increased to 34.4% compared with 28.5% in the prior year period, Emily.
Well, you gave me the hard assignment, Tim. When I come in, I fill in for Carol.
I'm sorry.
And I have to get the difficult job of finding the red on the salad pizza of the green IMAP, but I did find some decliners. Let's start with T. Rowe Price. Assets under management of $1.57 trillion, just matching estimates. We saw that stock lower about 3% on the day. Second quarter net revenue for the company and EPS also missed, down over 5% on an intraday basis, the biggest drop since February. But the big decliner today, the one that we've been talking about for the last several hours, is Dexcom, down 40%, the worst drop ever for the maker of blood sugar monitoring devices for diabetics, after the company unexpectedly slashed its 2024 sales guidance, citing a drop in customers and lower revenue per patient. This massive stock decline triggered several price target cuts. Cowen saying it was a rare, disappointing quarter for the company. And finishing up, we have another health-focused company, Biogen. That stock down as much as 7.7% on the day, biggest drop since February, after a committee of the European Medicines Agency recommended against the approval of Biogen's Alzheimer's drug. I will note that the company's drug is already approved in other countries, including the U.S., China, and Japan, but for Europe right now, it was a no. BMO said that the opinion adds a significant headwind to the drug's chance of approval in the EU and is likely to pressure shares.
Yeah, talk about not being on the same page with that one. All right, guys, let's get to the bond market here because we saw some nice rallying all across the board. Yields lower, whether you're looking at the twos or the belly or the back end of the curve. And I should point out that for the week, that 2-10 spread at one point moved about 16 basis points steeper. Now we're only about 8. But nonetheless, that's quite interesting. Like, that's a chunky move in 1 week for that yield curve. And it kind of brings into focus next week and what's actually priced in when it comes to the Fed. Can that front end continue to rally, guys?
Yeah, that's certainly the question. Hey, another question that I have ahead of everything that's going on when it comes to AI. We hear from another, few of the Mag 7 next week. We'll get an update on how these companies are investing in AI. Is what happens to the companies that are not necessarily focused on AI, but starting to adopt the tools using the AI, which brings us to one of the stories on the Bloomberg terminal this afternoon about how JP Morgan is giving their analyst staff their own version of ChatGPT. It's called LLM Suite. And what it does is it helps with research, it helps with writing, though they're quick to note that it doesn't contain specific asset and wealth management division knowledge. This is all according to an internal memo viewed by Bloomberg.
We have some breaking news crossing the wire. This on Bill Ackman and his ambitions to take at least part of Pershing Square public. We're now learning, based on the NYSE's website, that Pershing Square has now postponed the IPO of that closed-end fund that Bill Ackman had been trying to raise money for. We had learned, based on Bloomberg reporting, that he'd been trying to raise roughly about $25 billion on that. He had raised about $4 billion and had planned to push ahead with that IPO. But at least based on what we see on the NYSE website, that our Bloomberg reporters have been tracking, that IPO, at least for right now, has been postponed.
Yeah, the idea is that they were going to file with regulators to raise about $2.5 to $4 billion. So getting that scratched is very interesting. We'll keep tracking those headlines as they come out.
And part of the interesting aspect of this story is that Bill Ackman was counting on his social media presence to really drum up interest in this IPO and perhaps pricing for this IPO as well. I don't know what this says about his social media presence, though, this delay.
And I wonder how long it'll be postponed. Like, here's what we know is they were expected to price the IPO on Monday, trade on Tuesday. We didn't hear back. Representative Pershing Square declined to comment, and representatives from the New York Stock Exchange did not immediately respond to requests for comment.
Yeah, I mean, we have to get some more details on it, but if you look at the Bloomberg reporting that we had a couple days ago, it really seemed to be that at least the initial shopping of this just did not get the type of demand that I guess maybe they had set out to do. Maybe that's part of it. Maybe a postponement really is a postponement, but we'll see.
Yeah, that'll be quite interesting to see. And also, maybe it was just a bad market conditions from what we are looking at as well. Okay, before we go, you guys, did anyone watch the opening ceremonies?
We were working.
Are you kidding me? I've been watching nothing else. I haven't even been watching this program.
Was anyone else really terrified by the weird opening ceremony? What?
Terrified when they cut off Marie Antoinette's head.
And she's singing.
And she held it and sang. And then whatever the band was, it was like shredding heavy metal on the. Come on, this is classic.
I found it very upsetting, and I didn't understand it at all.
I agree. I have no idea what any of this has to do with the Olympics, but it was entertaining.
Well, it's a brief history of what happened in France, basically.
Nothing, because heavy metal came from Britain, and you had Les Mis. That was not written by a French person.
Marie Antoinette, that's
Did you see the big teaser, though?
How did How did you guys watch all this today?
Multitask.
This started at 1:30.
Tim.
Our show started at 2. I know you were tuned into our show from 2 to 3 while you were prepping for your show. How did you watch this?
Multitask.
We have lots
It's
of
like
monitors
normally at
open.
night.
Yeah.
Well, time change, you know.
Emily, what'd you say? It goes at night? It's night in Paris.
I feel like they're. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's true.
Time
See,
change.
we're just stuck here in this radio booth.
They lie. They have like 19 different screens there.
We do, but none of them are tuned to the Olympics. I guess that's for a reason.
We saw no torches today.
Maybe we can spend a little time this weekend watching the Olympics. Hopefully not too delayed. And, those spoilers, you got to stay off of Twitter. So
If
you
you
don't
paid
see
for
those spoilers.
Peacock, yes, you can.
All right. Well, perfect. I'll be doing that. You guys have a great weekend. That is going to do it for our cross-platform coverage of the market close on Bloomberg TV, radio, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals. Alex Steele, you're heading out soon, but we were going to all be back same time, same place on Monday. Have a great weekend, everyone.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, it is Bloomberg Business Week, and that is going to do it for at least the market open portion of our program. But we got a great 4 o'clock hour coming up. I do want to repeat that the S&P 500 closed higher by 1.1% today, 1% higher on the NASDAQ, and the Dow up 1.6%. Still seeing the NASDAQ down 2% on the week, the S&P 500 down 0.8%, and the Dow up 0.7% on the week.
What a volatile week.
Yeah.
So much happened. I was on vacation last week, and then I came back to this.
Oh, you were good vacation?
Yes, it was great.
Good.
Yes.
That's what I like to hear. Hey, we're just over halfway through 2024. It's hard to believe. Certainly been a wild year for AI startups, an explosion of innovation, funding, hype, and drama. Companies large and small. OpenAI, for example, set off a frenzy for high-quality AI-generated video by previewing its Sora video tool. Did you see this?
I don't think so.
So this is, ChatGPT can create stuff that you ask it to do, like, write a love letter or whatever, right? Well, you can, with Sora, you can create a video just by writing a prompt. It's really, really wild stuff. XAI from Elon Musk raised $6 billion. Perplexity AI became one of a growing number of startups to get into a copyright spat with media companies. I could go on and on, but why am I going to go on when we can get Rachel Metz to talk all about this? Because she's Bloomberg News AI reporter. She helped compile the list of the 10 AI startups to watch this year. She joins us from San Francisco. Rachel, good to have you with us this afternoon. So a few of the companies I would say people have heard of. And when I mean people, like not people like you, because this is your world and you've been doing this for a long time. People who just started paying attention to AI when ChatGPT came out a couple years ago. That's who've heard of some of these companies. So OpenAI, Anthropic, they're both on the list. Give us an idea of some of the other companies, though, that are on the list and how this came together.
Sure. Well, first, let's just say it was pretty hard to put this list together. This is the second annual AI Startups to Watch list that we put together. Last year it was tricky, but there were like a lot of companies that for us felt pretty obvious, like they had to be on there. This year it was actually so hard that you'll notice at the bottom of the list we have another 6 companies that it's kind of like ones to also watch, ones that we're keeping an eye on that might be on the main list next year. So for this one, there are some of the companies that you would expect, OpenAI and Anthropic, as you mentioned. There's also some other companies that they've raised less money or worth less money, like Suno, which can be used to generate music from a written prompt. And a couple other companies that are a little bit smaller, but they actually are having a really big impact on either how content is made or how people think about what is art, what is creativity, things like that. So yeah, I mean, we tried to make it a pretty varied list too. There's like 3 things we thought about here. One is how much money have you raised in total? What is the company worth? But a big part of it is also vibes. Like what's the buzz around the company? What kinds of things are people saying and doing about it?
Okay, so share with us some of those vibes. Maybe you'll pick a company on the list and what vibes stood out to Bloomberg News.
Oh, wow. Okay. So let's see. Perplexity, I think, is a really, really good example. They also they have some very interesting vibes around them in that I think they've made a lot of larger companies. OpenAI is still a startup, but it's quite a big company at this point. And Google, which is obviously one of the tech giants, I think it seems that it may have made those companies kind of nervous by putting together a product that is sort of like a search engine that uses what's known as a large language model. So it's kind of like ChatGPT with a different kind of search that is quite good at summarizing and citing sources. In fact, OpenAI just announced the other day a search product that I actually reported on pretty recently that it was going to be coming from OpenAI. It's called Search GPT, and it is somewhat similar to what Perplexity offers. And Google, I think, also has been a little bit nervous about what Perplexity has rolled out.
What in terms of the companies that are out there, what would you say? Because again, you've been covering these companies for years, and not necessarily these ones because some of these are on the newish side, but you've covered the space for years. What would you describe as the biggest difference between capabilities that you've been able to see this year, Rachel, on display, like Sora, for example, and capabilities that we saw just a year ago, to give us an idea of how quickly things are progressing?
I think what you're seeing this year is you're seeing like a wider range of what people can do with generative AI. Generative AI, essentially giving an AI model something, some words or maybe an image, maybe a sound, and it gives you back either written text or an image, a song. We're seeing more complicated creations. That's part of what I find really interesting. Like Suno, as I mentioned before, the kinds of songs you can generate with it are quite a bit more complicated than what you would have seen in the past few years. They will include vocals that sound pretty close to as a human would sing. And you can also manipulate those songs after the fact, make them longer, make them shorter, change things, customize the lyrics, things like that. So things are getting pretty complicated in an interesting way.
I'm taking a look at this list and looking at how much these companies have raised. No surprise, OpenAI is the highest, raised more than $13 billion. Tell us about the current environment for funding for these AI-focused startups. I would imagine it's very hot.
Yeah, I think a little bit of it depends on like what kind of company you are. For certain AI startups, it seems like they're still getting a lot of money, where I think we've also seen some correction in the market for AI startups, and some companies either looking for buyers or being bought out, sort of acqui-hired by other companies. So it kind of depends on who you are. Investors, for instance, aren't really pouring money into tons and tons of companies that are building large language models because those are super expensive. We have a number of those companies at this point, and I'm not sure how many more of those companies we're going to see that are actually successful.
What about the fundraising going into next year? What?
I mean, I think. Sorry, what were you about to say?
I was just like, what's the environment, like the temperature out there right now? Does it still feel like there's a frenzy, like it felt like over the last year?
It feels like there is still a lot of interest in and excitement in these kinds of companies, especially at certain VC firms. It kind of like depends on who you're talking to and where. I mean, I think they also have more knowledge about what they're interested in investing in. Venture investors in particular, people understand a little bit better what they're looking for, what they're not looking for, and getting a sense of like what might be just a feature versus that could be just added to somebody's existing product, or what might actually be a long-term product.
What about when you look at these companies, the quest for talent? Are these startups places where there's just so many people trying to work there, or are some of them on the list maybe on the smaller end?
Some of these companies are small, but are probably going to be getting bigger. Cohere is on this list. They just raised a really large round, and they have quite a big valuation. They're one of the top AI startups they're probably the biggest AI startup in Canada, and one of the biggest startups in general in Canada at this point. And they're planning to double their headcount this year. And there are also a bunch of other companies that are growing as well. I think overall, none of these companies are that huge. I mean, OpenAI as of like last winter, I think would have been around 700 people. I know it's I believe it's gotten bigger since then, but in terms of numbers, I mean, these companies aren't like the size of a company like Google.
It's incredible to see their valuation, just given the number of employees they have and how young they are. Rachel Metz, always a treat when you join us, especially on a Friday afternoon. Rachel Metz is Bloomberg News AI reporter. She helped compile this list. She joins us from San Francisco. Check out this list. It's on the Bloomberg terminal.
See you later.
And at Bloomberg.com. Coming up next, we talk to the founder and CEO of Piece of Cake Moving and Storage. This is Business Week.
It's 4:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We begin with two headlines from the Bloomberg Professional Service. Pershing Square is postponing its U.S. closed-end fund IPO, that according to the NYSE website. And NASDAQ holder Thoma Bravo will offer 41.6 million shares. It was an up day for the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ. Perhaps that is putting it mildly. The stock market got a boost at the end of a wild week after key economic data bolstered speculation that the Federal Reserve will set the stage next week for a rate cut in September. Now, on the week, We did have the S&P 500 index falling for a second week, down 0.8%. Today, however, S&P 500 index rallied 59 points, up 1.1%, finishing the week heading into the weekend at 54.59. The Dow today up 654 points, up 1.6%. The Nasdaq Composite Index up 176, higher by 1%, and the Russell 2000 Index of small cap shares was up 1.7%. 10-year yield 4.19%, the 2-year 4.38%. Gold up 0.9%, 23.86 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude down 1.8%, 76.84 a barrel. 3M surged today, the most, gaining the most since 1980 after raising its full-year profit forecast as its new CEO vowed to reinvigorate the iconic manufacturer's innovation engine. 3M makes everything from Post-it notes to industrial adhesives. 3M today surged 23%. Again, recapping, S&P up 59, up 1.1%. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thanks, Charlie. Appreciate it. Well, I knew this morning that our next guest was coming on the program, so I did a little bit of an experiment, and it's anecdotal, Emily, on my way into the office. How many of his trucks would I see between Brooklyn and Midtown? So I rode my bike, so I was above ground. So full disclosure, I was above ground the whole time. I saw 8 pink piece of cake moving and storage trucks. They're everywhere. They're all over the city.
That's got to be more than the Amazon trucks. I mean, I do see them everywhere. They're hard to miss.
Yeah, they're hard to miss.
They are huge and bright pink.
Vojislav Vojo-Popovich is the founder and CEO of Piece of Cake Moving and Storage. He joins us now from New York. Vojo, good to have you on the program. Full disclosure, didn't know you were coming on the show until this morning. I did use Piece of Cake Moving in our most recent move, so want to make sure I get that out there. You started this company with just a truck. Now you've got hundreds of them. You do $100 million a year in revenue. Give us your story, because it's pretty cool.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's an honor. Thank you for the nice introduction. And thank you for trusting us with your move, Tim. My story. So I moved to the United States at the age of 20. My first job was in McDonald's. After a few months, I changed the job. I picked up moving primarily for the reasons that I wanted to work longer hours and pretty much needed to make more money. And to be honest, there was nothing else for me to do, just being moved to the United States, but to work. As soon as I started doing moving, pretty much I fell in love with the job. I love that it's active, and I love that you move people's apartments. You actually get to meet a lot of people, and you get to see all these different lifestyles in New York City. I mean, it was truly a dream. Quickly, in a matter of a few years, I kind of climbed up the ladder. So I started as a helper, then I was a driver, a crew leader, then I did sales and office job in a moving company for a little while. And somewhere along the line, pretty much, I figured and kind of noticed that the industry was very outdated. Everything from operational aspect to customer service to how we send emails to how we schedule the jobs to how we finish the jobs to how we do the jobs. So I always wanted to have a business, and that was kind of a perfect opportunity for me. So at the age of 24, in 2018, I launched Piece of Cake by purchasing one truck for $20,000. And 7 years on, now we have over 300 trucks. We employ about 800 people, and we move 100,000 families a year.
So we just showed some video for our YouTube audience, a piece of cake truck that says, making you smile. And I have to be honest, moving, especially in New York City, has got to be one of the worst. The worst thing ever. So how do you run this company and make people smile, essentially? How do you make it a seamless experience for your customers when they obviously go into this with just such a negative connotation of what the day of the move is going to look like?
Yes. So we hear that a lot, by the way. Moving is the worst. And I agree. Even when I move myself, having a move and have a moving company, it's actually still sucks a little bit. So pretty much we focus on, it sounds simple, but we do focus on customer journey, on customer experience, and we just do whatever we can to make that day a little less stressful, to make it enjoyable. So whatever we can. For example, in our training guide for our movers, we have a line that says, we are providing a Michelin star restaurant customer experience. So pretty much that's what we live by. We are movers, and typically people would expect, okay, movers will come, they'll say good morning, and they'll just move things. What we try to do is just add a little human touch to that. Our crew leaders and our movers, it's very important. Like, communication is one of the most important things in this job. So we put an emphasis on that. And from the moment you call, from the moment you get in touch, you'll get assigned a human being. So pretty much one of our agents who will be with you throughout the whole journey. So you always have someone, a live person who you can talk to, email to, text to, and pretty much we get all your questions answered. And what also we do to make it a little more, say, enjoyable, so we call that internally, we call that matchmaking customer and moving crew. So what we would do is, so during conversation, during scheduling a move, pretty much our agent would know to where in life is that person that is moving, our client. Okay, so they would know, say, customers getting divorced, like a couple is splitting up, customers are widow, and things like that. And then they would leave a note for our operation team, and then we would kind of try and matchmake the customer and a moving crew, and do our best to provide the best moving experience they ever had.
Voyo, I'm wondering about employees, where you get employees, and if they're full-time employees versus not necessarily gig workers, but like how they're compensated if they're just working for tips. How do you get your employees? Because I've talked to a lot of piece of cake moving company employees, because whenever I see them on our block, I go to see if it's the same crew that did our place. It's not ever the same crew. That's how many employees there are. But so many of them are from Montenegro. Talk to us about that process.
Yes, absolutely. So it's same as you grow your business, right? As you grow your customer funnel, that's how we see also our movers, right? So what we have to do is we have to make sure that their work experience at Piece of Cake is the best work experience they ever had. So, and when we do that, and when we did that, pretty much we never had an issue with hiring people or finding people. We never advertised, so pretty much it's all word of mouth, it's all referral. There's a lot of moving companies in the city. It's very competitive. So before the summer, we would receive tons of applications from movers, from people who pretty much have 3, 4, 5, 10 years of experience, and so they would actually want to join Piece of Cake. So and that makes process for our HR much easier, because we actually get applicants and we don't ever advertise. So pretty much it's word of mouth.
Are they full-time employees or are they hourly? How does that work?
Some of them are full-time employees. Some of them are, we call that partner operator or contractors. So we have a mix.
How do you make it the best job ever when it's moving, which is really physically demanding? I mean, I think the crew that was with us, they were with us from like 10 a.m. to 2 a.m. all barely taking breaks. It's literally backbreaking work.
Yeah. So I mean, if you talk to your crew, I'm sure they said they loved it. I'm pretty sure. So pretty much, I mean, job is a job. If you do it right, the way we see it, it's a lot of our guys are in sports, or they play sport in high school, or they play sports semi-professionally. So most of them, if you ask them what's number one thing that you love about your job, they will say being active. It lets me be active. It's so exciting. It's every day I meet a new person. So that's one aspect of it, of the job. The other aspect is energy between us, energy within the company. So pretty much, I'm proud that I would say all of our employees, all of our staff, they take ownership in this, and they will represent the company the way I would represent it, even better.
We only have a little bit of time, but we're Bloomberg. We got to ask about the business. $100 million a year in revenue at this point. What's the plan? Are you going to IPO? Or are you going to sell? Very briefly.
Not planning to selling. We're also not discussing IPO. What we're planning to do is to grow the company to $500 million in revenue in the next 10 years. And we will do that by using the formula that we use so far, making customers happy, and also by investing in our people, growing our people, and by investing in technology.
Vojo Popovic, founder and CEO of Piece of Cake Moving and Storage, joining us from New York. Those pink trucks, can't miss them.
They're everywhere.
Yeah, they are.
This is an example of taking a company in an industry that people associate with a bad thing and using a good name and a fun color
for me.
Make it a positive experience.
Still, though, moving. No one likes it.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
Hey, let's get a check on the latest world and national news. We got Amy Morris in the Bloomberg 991 newsroom in Washington, D.C. Hey, Amy.
Hi, Tim. This just crossed the Bloomberg terminal. Donald Trump says he is returning now to Butler, Pennsylvania for a rally, posting on his Truth social media outlet that it will be a, quote, big and beautiful rally honoring the soul of our beloved firefighting hero, Corey, and those brave patriots injured 2 weeks ago. Donald Trump says then stay tuned for details. So we don't know exactly when this is going to happen, but he says he is returning to Butler, Pennsylvania. The Summer Games are underway in Paris, even after those coordinated arson attacks disrupted service on 3 high-speed train lines in France, causing chaos. Bloomberg's Albertina Torsoli has more from Paris.
What happened overnight is what has been defined by authorities a massive attack aimed at paralyzing the network of France's TGV trains. Those are the superfast trains just hours ahead of the inauguration ceremony.
Bloomberg's Albertina Torsoli reports a minimum of 800,000 people were left stranded, and the disruptions could last through the weekend. Barack and Michelle Obama endorsing Kamala Harris in the Democratic race for president. The former president and first lady releasing a video showing Vice President Harris speaking with them on the phone.
We called to say Michelle and I couldn't be prouder to endorse you and to do everything we can to get you through this election and into the Oval Office.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, meanwhile, got a warm greeting from Donald Trump at the start of their meeting in Florida, where Netanyahu says he is eager for a ceasefire deal.
I hope so, but I think time will tell. We're certainly eager to have one. And we're working on it. I think there's been some movement because of the military pressure that we exerted. I hope that there'll be sufficient movement to get the deal completed.
This less than a day after the Israeli leader received a not-so-veiled rebuke from Kamala Harris in Washington. Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it, with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg.
It's 4:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Turned out to be another losing week, 2 in a row now for the S&P 500 index on the week. The S&P was down 0.8%, though, a surge for the U.S. stock market today. However, the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all rallying. Stock market getting a boost at the end of a wild week after key economic data this morning bolstered speculation that the Fed will set up the stage for an interest rate cut in September. Today we had the S&P up 59 to 54.59 as we head into the weekend, a gain of 1.1%. The Dow rallied 654 points, up 1.6%. The NASDAQ Composite Index up 176, a gain of 1%. 10-year yield 4.19%, the 2-year 4.38%. Gold up $22 the ounce, up by 1%, while West Texas Intermediate crude dropped 2.1% to $76.65 for a barrel of WTI. So it was an update for the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ. Again, a losing week. As for the market backdrop for small cap shares, Lance Cannon is portfolio manager at Hood River Capital Management, and he was a guest right here on Bloomberg Business Week.
We actually see a lot of data points that would give us reason to be excited about the opportunities over the next 12 months, particularly given the fact that look at your small cap indexes relative to the large cap indexes or their equivalent peers. They historically have traded at premiums relative to the larger indexes, but right now these small cap indexes, whether it's international or domestic, are trading at equivalent or even below. And we think that rotation is going to continue to happen as we continue to see these opportunities.
Lance Cannon of Hood River Capital, again a guest right here on Bloomberg Business Week. Russell 2000 index of small cap shares advanced today by 1.7%. Sources tell Bloomberg Honeywell International is considering an IPO of its majority-owned quantum computing firm Quantinuum as soon as next year. Again, recapping, stocks higher, S&P up 59, a gain of 1.1%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Love this song. If you're spending your summer dancing to pop music like this song and wearing neon lime green, you, along with hordes of TikTok young adults and now even Kamala Harris, may be having a brat summer. The phrase is a viral meme that originates from Brat, the 6th studio album from British songwriter and pop artist Charlie XCX. Bloomberg's Amanda Mole writes that the album and its lime green motif have become near immediate fodder for memes, mostly in an effort to mark things as a particular type of edgy, Zoomer-approved cool. And now Vice President Kamala Harris is getting in on the trend with a tweet on Sunday night that simply said, "Kamala is brat." Here to explain what this has to do with Kamala's presidential campaign is Amanda Mole, senior reporter at Bloomberg Business Week, joining us on Zoom from New York City. So let's just start off for the people who are not well-versed in memes. What is a brat summer and why is Kamala having one? Because Tim is dying to know the answer to this.
That would be me.
Well, a brat summer is something that the definition of it has sort of developed as brat summer has worn on. It started as just sort of like something of a nonsense phrase, which is how a lot of memes start. Charlie's album is really fun. It is a lot of very danceable beats. It's a lot about partying, about having a good time. It is a super fun album. So I think that a lot of young people especially have dubbed their summer Brat Summer because they want to have fun. They want to go out with their friends. They want to go out to a club. They want to, dance, things like that. We're seeing a lot of that, like culturally. I think we've gotten far enough away from the pandemic where a lot of young people who were maybe in school during school closures have grown up a little bit and really just want to like get out there. So this was sort of like the perfect party album to pair with that. And it came out in early June. So this phrase has been around for a little while, long before Kamala Harris became the presumptive Democratic nominee. And I think that like the meme itself had gained some momentum in the past 6 weeks since the album had come out. And then when this happened, and it seemed to like ignite some interest in the campaign among young people who were already having a brat summer. So a lot of times new memes just come from two things being in proximity to each other. So brat summer was already in progress, and Kamala has joined the party, I suppose.
Well, now that I know about it, I think it's over, because that's typically how this stuff works.
That's probably true.
That's probably true. So I apologize to everybody who was hoping to have a brat summer. Why do you think Kamala Harris was so quick to embrace and be embraced by this culture? But like literally, I think I saw a picture on Sunday from Fire Island that had people wearing like Kamala shirts on Sunday, hours after this news came out. Why was Joe Biden not brat?
Well, I think that the Biden campaign had problems for quite a while in igniting interest and support among young people. His polling in that demographic was really bad for the entirety of the campaign, basically. And I think that in a lot of sectors of Democratic politics, people were worried about that. It wasn't clear that Joe himself was worried about that. He has probably other fish to fry, maybe not bigger, but other. And so when the campaign changed hands, I think that it seems like people who understood that the Democrats were having issues with young voters quickly took the reins, and sensing this uptick in interest and in conversation among young people, just sort of went like, okay, if they want to talk about us, even if it's sort of ironic, even if it's sort of detached, there's some enthusiasm under there somewhere, and we should just go directly at it and embrace it.
What have we seen so far about whether this is actually resonating with the younger voters? I mean, we know we have that anecdotal evidence that people are wearing Kamala t-shirts, but have you seen any kind of rise in donations to the campaign, or just more evidence that people are more interested in the campaign specifically?
There's been a lot of social media chatter. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence, but also you can start to see in some sort of circumstantial numbers that have started to come out since the campaign changed hands. Vote.org has experienced a real uptick in interest and in visits. The largest uptick in like quite a while. And you've also, the Harris campaign has said that that they've received donations through, I believe it's Act Blue, from nearly 1 million people who had not donated previously in this cycle. So you've got some evidence that people who were not previously engaged on a couple of different levels, both in voting overall, who are looking for information on how to do it, and people who had not been previously financially engaged, who are then like stepping up their level of involvement. So I think that, obviously a lot of that is just from the change in hands, but young voters are generally disengaged at a rate much higher than other cohorts of the population. So if you're seeing this sort of like basic uptick in just figuring out how to vote, I think it's safe to say that like probably a sizable portion of the interest is coming from that most disengaged cohort.
Yeah, I mean, the proof will be in the pudding, and we'll see who actually does turn out. Amanda, we only have about 30 seconds left, but I'm wondering, obviously, you observe this stuff. You're not giving strategy advice, but I'm wondering how the campaign is able to keep the momentum going and stay in the cultural zeitgeist for the next 100 days. Just 30 seconds.
Well, I think that the best way to do that is to, this is a lot of fluff. This is fun. People are having fun. But I think that in order to keep young voters engaged, Kamala Harris is going to have to put some real policy proposals forward that engage them on the things that they're interested in. Without doing that, I think this will peter out very, very quickly.
It'll become cringe.
Cringe.
That's another Gen Z term.
Are you Gen Z?
I'm like on the cusp of Gen Z.
You can be like the Gen Z whisperer to me. You can explain
Yeah.
brat and everything, so I appreciate that. Amanda Mull also whispers all things cultural on the internet. Also, check out her really great story on Erewhon, which is available on the Bloomberg terminal and at Bloomberg.com. We're going to have her back on to talk about that next week. Amanda Mull joining us from New York. Once again, markets did finish the day higher. Not the week, though. The S&P 500 down 0.8% for the week. The NASDAQ composite down more than 2% on the week. The Dow, though, higher by 0.8%. Much more coming up on Business Week right after this. This is Bloomberg.
Your company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Authorities are accusing famed short seller Andrew Left of committing fraud through stock trades, social media posts, and research reports. Their biggest move yet in a years-long crackdown against traders who tout their bearish bets. Left had no immediate comment. Turned out to be an up day for the U.S. stock market, but on a day when stocks were ripping higher, Dexcom shares were plunging 40.1% after the company cut its full-year sales forecast for the glucose monitoring devices relied upon by diabetics. And with more on the story, here's Bloomberg's Kimberly Adams.
Charlie, the San Diego-based medical device manufacturer said it expects revenue of $4 billion to $405 billion for 2024, compared to an earlier estimate of $4.2 billion to $4.35 billion. On a call with analysts, Dexcom executives said the company saw fewer new customers than expected after a revamp ramp of its sales force and lower revenue per customer than anticipated. CEO Kevin Sayer said the company believes its long-term target for 2025 is still valid, with revenue coming in closer to the low end of the range. Executives said revenue was also impacted by higher rebates as some large healthcare plans administering government programs shifted how they reimbursed for Dexcom's products. Charlie?
And that's Kimberly Adams reporting again. Dexcom today down by 40.1%. Charter Communication shares rallied after the cable and wireless company reported revenue that beat analyst estimates, boosted by a surge in residential mobile service. Today, Charter Communications was up by 16.6%. And those are our top company stories at this hour. I'm Charlie Pellett, and this is Bloomberg.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Messer and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
It is Bloomberg Business Week. Let's get a check on the latest world and national news. We got Amy Morris in the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom in Washington, D.C. Hey, Amy.
Hi, Tim. The 2024 Paris Summer Games are underway even after a coordinated act of sabotage crippled the country's high-speed rail network. Paris prosecutors have opened an investigation. Bloomberg French transport reporter Albertina Torsoli reports that there's no official word on who could be behind it.
Is it possibly Russian sabotage, or is it local? You also will remember that political situation is in a bit of a crisis after President Macron called for snap elections.
Bloomberg's Albertina Torsoli in Paris. Now, French officials say attackers set fires at 3 key rail nodes, leaving as many as 800,000 passengers stranded. That could last through the weekend. Former President Donald Trump calling for the hostages held by Hamas to be released immediately. He met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at Mar-a-Lago today. Trump adding that if he wins the presidential election in November, the conflict in the Middle East will be worked out, quote, very quickly. He posted on Truth Social that he plans to hold another rally in Butler, Pennsylvania, where 2 weeks ago, a shooter opened fire, killing one rally-goer. Trump did not say when he would return to Butler. Barack and Michelle Obama have endorsed Kamala Harris in the Democratic race for president. Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro also backing Harris. At a rally in Philadelphia, the governor of the critical swing state is also considered a possible running mate for Harris. As Harris prepares to take on Donald Trump, she's also said to be considering several veterans from the Obama administration, as well as a few Biden-era heavyweights. And she's turning to high-profile figures outside the Biden orbit, like Eric Holder, Obama's attorney general. He's helping to lead the vetting efforts for vice presidential candidates. Global news, 24 hours a day, whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris. Now back to Bloomberg Business Week with Emily Grafeo and Tim Stenevec.
Thank you so much, Amy. Do appreciate that. That's Amy Morris in the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom in Washington, D.C. I haven't been outside in a lot of hours here in New York. This morning was really nice, and it's supposed to be really nice this weekend.
Nice as in
not hot.
95 degrees Fahrenheit.
95 with 80% humidity.
Yeah, it's...
Why do people live here? I ask myself, as somebody who's lived here for more than a decade.
The tall skyscrapers just make the heat worse.
That's a real thing.
It feels, right?
Yeah, that's a real thing. Manhattan is hotter than other areas just outside of it as a result of the buildings and Mark Gongloff can come explain why, but there are real reasons why cities are hotter. Buildings give off heat.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, now we're learning that extreme heat is actually making our mental health worse. This is from an opinion column from Lisa Jarvis of Bloomberg Opinion. On Monday, Planet Earth achieved a terrifying milestone. Global temperatures reached their highest level in recorded history. And most of us understand that extreme heat is bad for our health, but too often we overlook the quieter, less obvious toll it takes on our brain, Tim.
Extreme heat, Lisa writes, doesn't just make us cranky and uncomfortable. Check and check. That's what it does to me. It can make it harder to think clearly and be productive at work. It also worsens our mental health. It exacerbates common mood disorders like anxiety and depression, as well as rare conditions like schizophrenia and self-harming. With each warming year, the issue deserves more and more time and attention, Lisa Jarvis writes for Bloomberg Opinion.
And she also writes that the elderly, young children, people taking certain medicines for schizophrenia or depression, and those with certain medical conditions or disabilities have a harder time thermoregulating, so essentially getting their brain to adapt to the extreme heat.
This is not a nice story to end the week on.
This isn't.
No. But
On a more positive note, maybe we can show this to our bosses and say we need more time off from work because it's too hot.
I'll let you
rest our brains.
lead the charge, okay? I'll let you lead the charge. I do want to thank you, Emily Grafeo from Bloomberg News cross-asset team, for filling in for Carol. I'll see you on Monday.
Yes.
Also, a big thank you to the entire team here at Bloomberg Business Week that makes this show happen. Anthony Mancini, Colin Tipton, Steve Lanzone, Meredith Frank, Sarah Livesey, Justin Milliner, CC Charandoff, Sebastian Escobar, Elizabeth Sedrin, and the one, the only, Paul Brennan. Have a great weekend, everyone. Stay cool, don't be too hot, and enjoy a little bit of time off. That is going to do it for Bloomberg Business Week. I'm Tim Stennebeck, Emily Grafeo.